Welcome. So good to be with you on this Wednesday as we get together for a little midweek Bible study and devotional time. So glad you've taken some time out of your day, out of your week to join us this week to dive into God's word and hopefully be uplifted and encouraged and maybe even a little bit challenged by what he has to say to us. I heard a story about a little boy, excuse me, who was misbehaving. And so his mom sent him to his room to think about it for a little bit. And so after a while, she called him out and she said, "Honey, you can come out of your room now, but I need you to come talk to me." And so he came out of his room, and as they were talking, he informed his mother that he had thought it over and that he'd even said a prayer about it. And his mom was pleasantly surprised, and she said, "Honey, that's great. I'm so proud of you for really handling it in that way. And if you ask God to help you do the right things, then He promises that He will help you." And the little boy said, "Oh, I didn't ask God to help me do the right things. I asked Him to help you put up with me." Well, there are certainly no shortage of jokes and stories and anecdotes about how not to pray and what not to pray for. But today we're going to look at a story that reminds us of the true power of prayer and persistence, and ultimately of trusting in God's timing and provision. The story is found in 1 Kings chapter 18, and it involves the Old Testament prophet Elijah, as we've been kind of walking through and looking at his life and the stories of his life over the past few weeks. And today we pick up the story in verse 41. So here's what it says. Elijah said to Ahab, King Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain." And so Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. "Go and look toward the sea," he told his servant. And he went up and looked. "There's nothing there," he said, his servant said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." And the seventh time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, and a wind rose. A heavy rain came on, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. And here I love this part. The power of the Lord, it says, came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. So in this passage, we witness Elijah's unwavering faith in the promises of God. For 3.5 years, Israel had suffered under the weight of a severe drought. And certainly at the forefront of that was the physical drought, because they were experiencing that on a very visceral level for the last 3+ years. But really, the drought physically was a manifestation of the spiritual drought that was going on and had been going on in the land much longer than that, brought about as a result of King Ahab and wicked King Ahab and wicked Queen Jezebel bringing into the land of Israel the idol worship of the false god Baal. Now, Elijah, the prophet, the only prophet of God left at that time, himself had just experienced this dramatic victory on Mount Carmel, where he had called down fire from heaven to prove the Lord's power over those false prophets of Baal and the falseness of Baal himself. And yet, despite this monumental event, Elijah's journey wasn't over just yet. He now anticipated the end of the drought, not just the physical drought, but the spiritual drought, but the literal representation of the end of the drought, and a renewed sense of God's reign, REIGN, as a result of God's reign, RAIN, in the land. And Elijah's actions teach us about perseverance in prayer and in faith. When he declared that the rain was coming, and there was no visible sign of it, right? Only a promise. But he prayed fervently and expectantly, sending his servant to look for any hint of change. And after 6 seemingly unsuccessful reports of nothing, the servant finally saw a small cloud, no bigger than a man's hand. But that tiny sign was enough for Elijah. He trusted that this was the beginning of a great transformation and the answer to his prayers for God's rain to fall. And this moment is, I think, a powerful reminder, first of all and foremost, to the faithfulness of God. It's a wonderful example of that, but also to the fact that God often works in subtle and sometimes seemingly insignificant ways before bringing about great change, partly because he wants a little bit of perseverance and trust on our part. And in our own lives, we might face some times when it seems as though God is distant and silent on the prayers that we are asking for. And we may pray and see no immediate answers, but Elijah's persistence shows us that we can trust in God's promises. Even though the smallest signs of God's action may be present, we can still trust. And may that be enough for us to believe that He is good and He keeps His promises. So let me ask you, what are some areas in your life where, just like Elijah, you're waiting for a breakthrough? You're waiting for God to answer. Maybe you've been praying and praying and praying and waiting and waiting and waiting and just doesn't feel like God is answering. I pray that for you, just like Elijah, you would continue to seek God's intervention with faith and persistence. And even if the signs seem small or the answer is delayed, know that God is at work. The rain may start as a small cloud, but it can bring about abundant blessings and renewal. That's why I'm so thankful for lessons of faith and perseverance like this one here in Elijah's life. They help me, and hopefully they help you to remain steadfast and hopeful even when the signs of God's work aren't immediately overt and obvious. And I pray that always, but especially in those times, that God would grant us the patience to wait for His perfect timing and the strength to trust in His provision. Hope you have a blessed day. God bless.